that just confirms it. Sight translation is the oral rendition of text written into one language into another. So what actually happens is that you'll be provided with a written text. You're given some time to read through it, and then you read it out loud in the target language. So when you're actually reading it through, if you think about the actual process of sight translation, this is generally how you should spend the time, because you're not really given enough time to read it all in detail. You're certainly not given enough time to try and memorize the whole message, or to write down the translation of the message so that you can then just read out what you've put through. It is literally just a few minutes to have a look at it. So the best way to do it is to divide that up into sections, easily manageable chunks, so that you are better prepared. So what you'd want to do is to first of all scan the whole text to determine the subject matter, context, and register. Now, of course, the context is quite important, because the context of a text might change the way that you actually read some of it out. So just quickly scanning through will give you that context first of all, and you'll understand the gist of what you need to talk about when you read it out loud. It will also allow you to have a look at the subject matter. Generally, the subject matter should be aligned to what you've just been talking about with the doctor. So often when a sight translation is asked for, it will be toward the end of an assignment. It's unlikely that you'd go in and the first thing you'd be asked to do is do a sight translation, although I suppose it's not impossible. So generally that subject matter should be aligned to what the rest of the discussion has been so far. And also the register, not registering as an interpreter, but actually register of the piece of work you're doing. So you can have a register when you're consecutively interpreting, and you can have a register with sight translation. Kasia?
It's the level of formality.
Yeah, exactly. So it's how formal a text is. So you're also looking at that level of formality. Okay. You're also wanting to analyze the text and divide it into logical chunks of information. So like you do when you're doing spoken interpreting, you're listening to what someone's saying, and you're kind of dividing it into logical chunks of information. You can try and break down the text that you're reading into those chunks as well. So you're looking probably at sentences, maybe paragraphs, and how the text is actually created and what it's talking about. You might then want to do what's called parsing. So parsing is where you analyze each section of a chunk. So you've already maybe divided it into chunks of information. Sometimes the document itself does that for you as well by putting it in different paragraphs or different subheadings. But you want to analyze each section or sentence of that chunk, and then try and identify parts of speak or syntactic relations. So who's the subject, the object, and other grammatical elements. And what that means is when you again come back to read that out loud, to interpret that verbally, then you'll find it a bit easier, because you've already broken down the text into smaller, more manageable chunks. You might also want to identify terms you don't understand or you're not clear on, and make a note of them. So of course, when you're providing a sight translation, don't forget that you normally have the professional there in the room. In fact, the professional shouldn't leave the room, even though you're doing a sight translation. They should still be there for a number of different reasons. So that's where, again, you can ask for clarification if you need to, or if you've taken any glossaries or dictionaries into the room as well, you can actually use those to look up any particular terms or phrases. Now, when it comes to a written text, sometimes you do find a little bit more terminology in those texts than you would do in a spoken conversation between a doctor and a patient, just because using the actual words, as long as they're not too unknown to people, everyday people like myself, when they come to read them, they might use them in there because it's the most concise way to get an idea across, whereas a doctor might explain it a little bit more. So during a sight translation, it's not unusual to find that actually there's a bit more terminology than the general conversation, but that's okay, because you have a little bit more time to actually use those glossaries, and it's not going to interrupt the flow of a conversation. But again, you do have limited time, so it's not a case that you can look up absolutely every single word. Again, just look up the things that you're not 100% clear about. Or again, if you want to, you can ask a professional. You can also search for translations if you want to, so you can use your glossaries or the dictionary to actually find the translation of that term. And then if you've got time, then you can always just skim through the whole text again to remind yourself of what it is before you actually start reading it out loud. It is really important, though, as I've already said, to try to fully understand the text, but don't try and memorize the text. and try and memorize an interpretation, because you'll end up just tripping over yourself and making a mess of it normally. Some people could possibly do it, but again, you're focusing on the gist so that when you come to read it out loud, you're aware of what's coming, and that will help you to choose the right words.